I was standing at my kitchen window watching my rooster strut across the yard when I saw her marching up my driveway like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, and that trademark look of righteous indignation plastered across her face. Karren Whitmore, president of the Meadowbrook HOA, had been a thorn in my side since she moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago, but this was the first time she'd actually set foot on my property. I opened the door before she could knock, mostly because I didn't want her disturbing the peace more than necessary. "Can I help you, Mrs. Whitmore?" Her lips pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. "Mr. Irving, I'm here on official HOA business. We've received multiple complaints about the excessive noise coming from your property, specifically from those animals you're keeping illegally." I couldn't help but laugh. "Illegally? Madam, do you know what an agricultural zone is?" She waved her clipboard at me like it was a weapon. "I don't care what zone you think you're in. This is a residential neighborhood, and your roosters are waking people up at 5 in the morning. Not to mention the goats bleating at all hours and those ducks making a racket by your pond. First of all, I have one rooster, singular, and he crows at dawn because that's what roosters do. Second, my 3 goats are quieter than most people's dogs. Third, the ducks barely make any noise at all." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "And most importantly, I'm in an AG1 agricultural zone. I'm allowed to have livestock here. It's completely legal." Karen's face was turning an impressive shade of red. "We'll see about that. I'm filing a formal complaint with the county, and I expect you to remove these animals within 30 days or face fines." "You go right ahead and file that complaint," I said. "I'll be here waiting." She spun on her heel and marched back down my driveway, nearly tripping over a root in her rush to leave. I watched her go, shaking my head. When I'd bought this 5-acre property in Polk County, Oregon 2 years ago, it had been specifically because of the agricultural zoning. I'd done my research, talked to the county planning department, and made sure everything was completely above board before I brought home a single chicken. My name is Keith Irving, and I'd moved out here from Portland after working as a software engineer for 15 years. The tech burnout was real, and I'd wanted something completely different. The small farm life appealed to me, even though I was still working remotely part-time to pay the bills. I had 10 chickens, 3 Nigerian dwarf goats named Peanut, Butter, and Jelly, and 6 ducks that spent most of their time in the pond I'd built in the back 40. It wasn't a huge operation, but it was mine, and it was legal. The Meadowbrook HOA was an interesting creature. When the neighborhood was first developed 20 years ago, the developer had created the HOA for the main residential section, which was zoned R1 for single-family homes. But my property, along with 3 others on the outskirts, had been zoned agricultural from the start. We weren't technically part of the HOA, though we got their newsletters and meeting notices because our addresses were close enough that the mailing list included us. I'd ignored most of their correspondence until Karren Whitmore took over as president. She seemed to think the entire area should fall under her jurisdiction. Geography and zoning laws be damned. 2 days later, I got a call from the Polk County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Martinez asked if I could be home that afternoon because they needed to follow up on a noise complaint. I told him I'd be there and spent the rest of the morning wondering exactly how this was going to play out. Deputy Martinez arrived at 2 in the afternoon in his patrol car, and I met him in the driveway. He was a friendly-looking guy in his late 30s with laugh lines around his eyes. "Mr. Irving?" he asked, extending his hand. "That's me. Come on in, or would you rather talk out here?" "Out here is fine. I got a complaint from a Mrs. Karren Whitmore about livestock noise violations. She was pretty insistent that I come out and cite you immediately." He was already grinning, which I took as a good sign. "Let me guess. She told you I was running an illegal farm in a residential area?" "Something like that." He pulled out a small notebook. "Mind if I take a look around?" "Not at all." I walked him around the property, showing him the chicken coop, the goat shelter, and the duck pond. He took notes and occasionally asked questions about how many animals I had and how I cared for them. When we got back to the front of the house, he closed his notebook. "Mr. Irving, I'm going to level with you. Mrs. Whitmore has called our office 6 times in the past week about this. She's claiming you're in violation of county noise ordinances and running an illegal animal operation." My stomach dropped. "And?" He laughed, actually laughed. "And I pulled up your property records before I came out here. You're in AG1 zoning. You could have 50 chickens, a dozen goats, and a whole flock of ducks if you wanted. Everything you're doing is completely legal. More than legal, actually. You're well within the livestock limits, even for agricultural zones. Relief washed over me. So what happens now? Now I go back and file a report saying there's no violation. Mrs. Whitmore isn't going to be happy about it, but that's not really my problem. He paused. Between you and me, she's been a persistent caller on a lot of issues. We've had her file complaints about people parking on the street, kids playing basketball after 7 p.m., someone's wind chimes being too loud. Most of them have been unfounded. Sounds about right, I said. She seems to think she runs the whole county. She doesn't, Deputy Martinez said firmly. And just for your information, if she continues to harass you about this, you can file a complaint with us. What you're doing here is legal, and you have every right to enjoy your property in peace. We shook hands, and he drove off. I felt vindicated, but I also had a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. Karren Whitmore didn't strike me as the type to give up easily. I was right. The next week, I received a certified letter from the Meadowbrook HOA attorney. It was 3 pages of legal jargon that basically boiled down to them claiming that my property was subject to their covenants and restrictions and that keeping livestock violated those restrictions. They demanded I remove the animals within 15 days or face legal action. I called my own attorney, Marcus Chen, who I'd used when buying the property. He read through the letter while I waited on the phone. "This is garbage," he said bluntly. "Your property was never part of their HOA. The original plat maps clearly show the agricultural parcels were excluded from the homeowners association. They have absolutely no authority over you. So what do I do? I'll draft a response explaining that you're not subject to their authority and that any further harassment will be met with legal action of our own. Don't worry, Keith, they're bluffing, and they're doing it badly." Marcus sent the letter within 2 days. I thought that might be the end of it, but I should have known better. The following Saturday morning, I was out feeding the chickens when I heard car doors slamming. I looked up to see Karren Whitmore and 2 other people I recognized from the neighborhood, a man named Doug Peterson and a woman named Linda Hayes, walking onto my property. They were all carrying cameras and clipboards. "Can I help you?" I called out, walking toward them. "We're conducting an inspection," Karren announced. "As HOA president, I have the right to inspect properties for violations." "No, you don't," I said, keeping my voice level. "You have no authority here. This isn't HOA property. We'll see what the judge says about that." She started taking pictures of my chicken coop. "You need to leave. Now? This is private property, and you're trespassing." Doug stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "We're not going anywhere until we've documented all your violations." I pulled out my phone. "Then I'm calling the sheriff." "Go ahead," Karren said smugly. "They'll just tell us to work it out ourselves." I dialed 911 and explained the situation. The dispatcher said someone would be out shortly. Karren and her crew continued walking around my property, taking pictures and making notes. It took everything in me not to physically escort them off my land, but I knew that would just make things worse. 15 minutes later, Deputy Martinez arrived again, this time with another deputy I didn't recognize. "Folks, I'm going to need you to leave this property," Martinez said calmly. "We're conducting official HOA business," Karren protested. "Madam, this property is not part of your HOA. Mr. Irving has asked you to leave, which means you're trespassing. You need to go now, or I'll have to cite you." Linda looked nervous. "Karren, maybe we should just go." "Absolutely not. We have rights." "No, madam, you don't. Not on someone else's private property." Martinez's voice was getting firmer. "This is your last warning. Leave now, or you'll be cited for trespassing." Doug and Linda were already backing toward their car. Karren stood her ground for another moment, then huffed and followed them. "This isn't over, Mr. Irving. Not by a long shot." After they left, Martinez came over to me. "I'd recommend you post some no trespassing signs. If they come back after that, we can arrest them instead of just citing them." "I'll do that today," I said. "Thank you. Also," he added, "you might want to consider getting security cameras, just in case." That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store and bought 4 no trespassing signs, which I posted at all the obvious entry points to my property. I also ordered a security camera system online that would cover the driveway, the chicken coop, and the goat shelter. If Karren was going to escalate things, I wanted documentation. The cameras arrived 3 days later, and I spent a full day installing them. The system connected to my phone, so I'd get alerts whenever there was motion in certain zones. It felt a bit like overkill, but Deputy Martinez's warning had stuck with me. That Sunday, I was invited to a barbecue at my neighbor Tom's house. Tom Cartwright lived on one of the other agricultural parcels about a quarter-mile down the road. He raised bees and had a massive vegetable garden. His wife Susan made the best potato salad I'd ever tasted. "Heard you've been having trouble with the HOA," Tom said, flipping burgers on the grill. "Word travels fast. Small community. Plus, Karren tried the same thing with us about 3 years ago. Said our beehives were a danger to the neighborhood and demanded we remove them." "What happened?" "We showed her the zoning laws. She backed off for a while, then tried again with some bogus complaint about our greenhouse being an unpermitted structure. That one actually made it to the county, but they dismissed it pretty quickly. We have all our permits in order." Susan joined us, carrying a platter of vegetables. "She's relentless. We heard she even tried to get Jerry McAdams in trouble for his horse barn, claimed it was too close to the property line. County surveyor came out and confirmed it was exactly where it was supposed to be. Jerry was the third agricultural property owner in the area. I'd met him a few times at the feed store, but didn't know him well." "Why is she so obsessed with us?" I asked. Tom shrugged. "Control, mainly. She doesn't like that there are properties she can't dictate rules to. Plus, I think she genuinely believes that having farms nearby hurts her property value." "Does it?" "No," Susan said flatly. "If anything, it helps. People like the rural character of the area. That's why they moved here instead of staying in the city." We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about gardening, livestock, and the general absurdity of HOA politics. It was nice to be around people who understood what I was dealing with. The next morning, Monday, I woke up to an alert on my phone. Motion detected at the chicken coop at 3:47 a.m. I pulled up the footage and watched as 2 figures in dark clothing walked up to the coop, looked around, and then left. The video was dark, but I could make out enough detail to see they didn't actually do anything, just seemed to be scouting. I saved the footage and called Deputy Martinez. He came by that afternoon to review it. "Can't tell who it is from this," he said, squinting at my phone screen. "But the fact that they came at 3 in the morning is suspicious. Keep an eye on your cameras. If they come back and actually do something, we'll have enough for a case. Do you think it's Karren?" "I wouldn't speculate on that, but I will say that you should be careful and document everything." 2 nights later, my phone woke me up at 2:15 a.m. with another motion alert. This time, the camera caught someone cutting the lock on my chicken coop and opening the door. I immediately called 911 and threw on clothes, grabbing a flashlight as I ran outside. By the time I got to the coop, whoever it was had fled. The door was wide open, and my chickens were in various states of panic. Feathers everywhere, one hen had escaped into the yard, and my rooster was crowing his head off in confusion. It took me 20 minutes to round up all the chickens and secure them back in the coop with a new lock I kept in my garage. Deputy Martinez and another officer arrived while I was finishing up. "Got it all on camera," I told them, pulling up the footage on my phone. The video was clearer this time because the motion had triggered the night vision. It showed someone in a dark hoodie and jeans approaching the coop with bolt cutters. They cut the lock, opened the door, and seemed to be trying to shoo the chickens out. When my outdoor lights came on, triggered by the motion, they ran. "Can you tell who it is?" I asked. Martinez rewound the footage several times. "Not definitively, but I can tell you it's a woman, probably 5'6" or so based on the height relative to your coop door. We'll need to enhance this at the station, but you might want to send me a copy." I emailed him the footage right there. "What happens now?" "Now we investigate. This is criminal trespass and vandalism at minimum, possibly animal cruelty depending on intent. If we can identify who did it, they'll face charges." I barely slept the rest of that night. The next morning, I reinforced all my animal enclosures with better locks and added more cameras. Whatever was happening, it was escalating, and I needed to be prepared. That afternoon, I got a call from Marcus Chen. "Keith, I just got served with a lawsuit. The Meadowbrook HOA is suing you for violating their covenants and for being a nuisance to the neighborhood." "You're kidding." "I wish I was. It's completely frivolous, and we'll get it dismissed, but it's going to cost you some money in legal fees and waste a lot of time. They're claiming your animals constitute a health hazard and are diminishing property values in the area. Based on what evidence? They have affidavits from 3 homeowners saying they can smell your livestock from their properties and that the noise is disruptive. They're also claiming you're in violation of county health codes. I felt my blood pressure rising. This is insane. The nearest HOA house is half a mile away. There's no way they can smell my goats from there. I know. We'll fight it. I'm going to file a motion to dismiss based on lack of jurisdiction. And I'm also going to request sanctions against them for filing a frivolous lawsuit. In the meantime, document everything. Take pictures of your property, your animals, the distances involved. Get statements from the other agricultural property owners if you can. After hanging up with Marcus, I sat at my kitchen table feeling overwhelmed. This had gone from annoying to actively hostile in the span of 2 weeks. But I wasn't going to back down. I'd done nothing wrong, and I wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA president bully me off my own land. I called Tom and Susan and explained the situation. They immediately offered to provide statements supporting me and documenting their own experiences with the HOA. Jerry McAdams, the horse owner, said he'd do the same when I called him. The next few weeks were a blur of legal preparation. Marcus filed our response to the lawsuit, and we started gathering evidence. I took measurements showing the distances between my property and the nearest HOA homes. I got a letter from my veterinarian confirming that all my animals were healthy and well cared for. I even hired an environmental consultant to come out and do an odor assessment, which confirmed that any smells from my livestock dissipated well within my property boundaries. Meanwhile, the sheriff's department was investigating the chicken coop incident. They'd enhanced the video footage and were following up on leads, though they wouldn't tell me specifics. A month after the lawsuit was filed, I got a call from Deputy Martinez asking me to come to the sheriff's office. When I arrived, he led me to a conference room where Detective Sarah Brennan was waiting. "Mr. Irving, thank you for coming in," she said, gesturing to a chair. "We've been investigating the incident at your property, and we've made some progress." "Did you identify who did it?" "We believe so. We've enhanced the video footage, and we've also pulled some other evidence. But before we proceed, I want to ask you a few questions. Have you had any other incidents since the chicken coop break-in?" "No, nothing. I upgraded all my security, and I think that scared them off." "Good. Now, you've had ongoing issues with the Meadowbrook HOA, specifically with Karren Whitmore, correct?" I nodded and gave her a full rundown of everything that had happened, from the initial confrontation to the lawsuit. Detective Brennan took notes and asked clarifying questions. When I finished, she exchanged a glance with Deputy Martinez. "Mr. Irving, we've identified the person in your video as Linda Hayes, one of the HOA board members. We compared the footage to her driver's license photo and other images, and we're confident it's her. We've also obtained phone records showing multiple calls between Mrs. Hayes and Mrs. Whitmore in the hours before the incident." "So Karren put her up to it?" "We're still investigating that, but it's looking likely. We're going to bring Mrs. Hayes in for questioning. Depending on what she says, we may bring charges against both of them." 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Brennan. Linda Hayes confessed. She said Karren Whitmore convinced her that your animals were a danger to the neighborhood, and that if they could get the chickens loose, it would prove you couldn't properly contain them. She's agreed to testify against Mrs. Whitmore in exchange for a reduced charge. What kind of charges are we talking about? For Mrs. Hayes, probably criminal mischief in the 3rd degree, which is a misdemeanor. For Mrs. Whitmore, we're looking at criminal conspiracy, criminal mischief, and potentially stalking given the pattern of harassment. Those are a mix of misdemeanors and potentially a felony, depending on how the DA wants to charge it. The news spread through the community like wildfire. By the end of the week, there was an emergency HOA meeting to discuss Karren's position as president. I wasn't invited, obviously, but Tom attended as a concerned neighbor and gave me the details afterward. It was chaos, he said, grinning. Half the board wanted her to resign immediately. The other half were trying to figure out if they could be held liable for her actions. Someone brought up the lawsuit against you, and when they found out how much the HOA's insurance deductible was, they completely lost it. What happened? They voted to remove her as president, effective immediately. They're also dropping the lawsuit against you. Their attorney advised them that not only would they lose, but you'd probably countersue and win." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Who's the new president?" "Guy named Richard Foster. He seems reasonable. He actually stood up at the meeting and said the HOA needed to stay in its own lane and stop bothering people who aren't even members." The legal proceedings took several months to work through. Linda Hayes pled guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to community service and probation. Karren Whitmore tried to fight the charges, but with Linda's testimony, the video evidence, and the phone records, the case against her was solid. In the end, Karren pled no contest to criminal conspiracy and criminal mischief. She was sentenced to 90 days in jail, which was suspended in favor of a year of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a restraining order that required her to stay at least 500 feet away from my property and prohibited her from contacting me directly. She also had to pay restitution for my legal fees related to the criminal case and for the damage to my chicken coop. Her husband, who I'd barely seen throughout this whole ordeal, looked absolutely mortified at the sentencing hearing. The civil lawsuit was formally dismissed, and Marcus filed a countersuit for malicious prosecution. The HOA's insurance company settled quickly, paying my legal fees and an additional $15,000 in damages. Marcus advised me that we could probably get more if we went to trial, but I was exhausted and just wanted it to be over. With the settlement money, I made some improvements to my property. I built a better shelter for the goats with proper ventilation and heating. I expanded the chicken coop and added 6 more hens. I even built a nice workshop for myself where I could do woodworking projects. Life settled into a peaceful routine. The new HOA president, Richard Foster, actually stopped by one afternoon to apologize on behalf of the organization. "What Karren did was inexcusable," he said. "The HOA should never have gone after you in the first place. You're not even a member, and even if you were, you weren't doing anything wrong." "I appreciate that," I said. "No hard feelings toward the HOA as a whole. Karren was the problem, not the organization. Still, I want you to know that if you ever do have any issues with the neighborhood, my door's open. We want to be good neighbors, not adversaries." We shook hands, and he left. It was a nice gesture, and I believed he was sincere. A few weeks after everything was settled, I was standing in my yard at dawn watching the sun come up over the hills. My rooster crowed right on schedule, and the goats were already bleating for their breakfast. The ducks were paddling around their pond, and I could hear the chickens starting to stir in their coop. This was exactly why I'd moved out here. The peace, the animals, the connection to something real and tangible. I'd worked hard to build this life, and I'd defended it when someone tried to take it away. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "BBQ at our place Saturday. Susan's making that potato salad you like." I smiled and texted back that I'd be there. Life was good on the farm, and I intended to keep it that way. The community response in the following months was overwhelmingly positive. Several people from the HOA neighborhood actually stopped by to meet my animals and apologize for the whole situation. One family, the Rodriguezes, started bringing their kids by on weekends to help feed the chickens and learn about farm animals. The kids, 2 boys aged 7 and 9, were absolutely delighted by everything. "Can we pet the goats?" the younger one, Miguel, asked on their first visit. "Sure, just be gentle. Peanut butter and jelly are pretty friendly, but Peanut can be a little shy." The boys spent an hour playing with the goats, feeding them treats, and learning how to properly brush their coats. Their parents, Carlos and Maria, watched with obvious relief. "Thank you for this," Maria said. "They've been begging for a pet, but our HOA rules only allow cats and dogs under 20 pounds. This is the next best thing." "They're welcome any time," I said. "It's actually helpful to have them socialized with different people." The weekend visits became a regular thing, and I found I enjoyed having the kids around. They were respectful of the animals and genuinely interested in learning. Miguel even started a journal documenting the chicken's egg production, carefully noting which hens laid which colored eggs. One Saturday in late summer, about 6 months after the whole Karren debacle, Carlos approached me while the boys were collecting eggs. "Keith, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. There's going to be a vote at the next HOA meeting about wildlife corridors and agricultural preservation. Some of the members want to put together a formal statement supporting the agricultural properties in the area." "Really?" "Really. After what happened with Karren, a lot of people started educating themselves about zoning and property rights. They realized that the agricultural parcels actually add value to the community, not detract from it. Richard Foster is leading the initiative. That's good to hear. There's more. They're also looking at amending the HOA bylaws to explicitly state that the HOA has no jurisdiction over non-member properties and to establish a formal process for handling disputes that prevents what Karren did from happening again. It was gratifying to know that some good was coming out of the whole mess. The HOA held their vote the following week, and it passed with an overwhelming majority. They even put up a small sign at the entrance to the neighborhood that read, Meadowbrook Community, Preserving Rural Character Since 2005. Tom called me the night after the vote. Did you hear? Carlos told me about it. It's pretty amazing. Susan and I were talking, and we think we should have a harvest festival this fall. All 4 of us agricultural properties could participate. Show people what we're actually doing out here. Let them meet the animals. Buy fresh eggs and honey and vegetables. What do you think? I think that sounds great. We spent the next few months planning. Jerry McAdams agreed to offer pony rides for kids. Tom and Susan would sell honey and produce. I'd sell eggs and maybe some of Susan's potato salad if she was willing to make extra. We'd do it in October, right around harvest time. The festival was a huge success. Over 200 people showed up, mostly from the HOA neighborhood, but also from the surrounding areas. Kids ran around petting goats and feeding chickens. Adults bought fresh produce and asked questions about beekeeping and sustainable farming. Jerry's horses were absolutely bombarded with children wanting rides. I was manning the egg stand when I saw a familiar face approaching. It took me a moment to recognize Doug Peterson, one of the people who'd come onto my property with Karren that day to take pictures. He looked uncomfortable. Keith, I owe you an apology. What I did was wrong. I shouldn't have trespassed on your property, and I shouldn't have supported Karren's vendetta against you. I studied him for a moment. He seemed sincere. I appreciate you saying that. I got caught up in her rhetoric, you know? She made it sound like you were doing something terrible, like you were destroying the neighborhood. I didn't bother to check the facts, and that's on me. He paused. For what it's worth, I voted to remove her as president, and I've been working with Richard to make sure nothing like that happens again. Then we're good, I said, extending my hand. He shook it, relief evident on his face. Thank you. And these eggs, they're really fresh? Collected this morning. He bought 2 dozen and walked away looking much lighter than when he'd arrived. As the sun started to set and the festival wound down, I looked around at the happy families, the satisfied customers, and my fellow agricultural property owners. This was what community was supposed to be about, not rules and restrictions and power plays, but mutual respect and understanding. Tom came over with a beer in each hand, offering me one. Not bad for our first year, huh? Not bad at all. We clinked bottles. Think we should make it an annual thing? Definitely. Susan joined us, followed by Jerry and his wife Patricia. We stood there together as the last few visitors trickled out, talking about next year's festival and swapping stories from the day. You know what the best part is? Jerry said. 3 different families asked me about the zoning in this area because they're looking to buy property and want to keep animals. I gave them the county planning department's number. More chickens and goats in the neighborhood, I said. Karren would have had a fit. We all laughed at that. Speaking of Karren, I'd seen her exactly once since the sentencing. She'd been at the grocery store, and our eyes had met across the produce section. She'd turned and walked quickly in the other direction. I'd heard through the grapevine that she and her husband were planning to move. The restraining order had another 6 months to run, and I got the impression she just wanted to leave the whole situation behind. I couldn't blame her, honestly. She'd let her need for control spiral into criminal behavior, and it had cost her dearly. Her reputation was destroyed, she had a criminal record, and from what I understood, her marriage was hanging by a thread. It was a cautionary tale about what happens when HOA power goes unchecked. The autumn passed peacefully. I added 2 more goats to my little herd, both rescues from a farm that was downsizing. The chickens continued to lay eggs prolifically. The ducks had a successful mating season, and I ended up with 8 adorable ducklings that I raised through the winter. In December, I got a call from Marcus Chen. Keith, I wanted to let you know that the restraining order against Karren Whitmore is about to expire. Do you want to request an extension? I thought about it. No, I don't think so. She's been compliant, right? Completely. No violations at all. Then let it expire. I don't want to keep this going longer than necessary. You're a better man than most. I'll file the paperwork. Christmas that year was special. Carlos and Maria invited me to their family celebration, and I brought fresh eggs and a honey ham that Susan had helped me prepare. The kids showed me their journals from visiting the farm, filled with drawings and observations and charts. Miguel wants to be a veterinarian now, Maria told me, and Roberto is talking about agricultural science. You've had a real impact on them. They're great kids, I said. They've been a help to me too. It was true. Having the boys around had reminded me why I'd wanted to do this in the first place. It wasn't just about escaping the city or living a different lifestyle. It was about connection to the land, to the animals, to the community. It was about building something meaningful. In January, I got an invitation to speak at a county planning commission meeting about agricultural zoning in suburban areas. Apparently, our little situation had attracted attention, and the county was considering updating their zoning regulations to better protect agricultural properties from HOA overreach. I prepared a statement and showed up on the appointed evening. The commission chambers were surprisingly full. I recognized several faces from the neighborhood, including Richard Foster and the Rodriguezes. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the microphone and took a deep breath. My name is Keith Irving, and I own a small farm on 5 acres in the Meadowbrook area. Last year, I was harassed and sued by an HOA that had no jurisdiction over my property, culminating in criminal charges against the HOA president for vandalizing my chicken coop. I'm here today to ask you to consider regulations that would prevent this from happening to others. I went on to explain the situation in detail, emphasizing the importance of clear boundaries and the need for HOAs to understand and respect zoning laws. I talked about the positive outcome of the community coming together, but also about the stress, expense, and fear I'd experienced. Several other people spoke as well. Tom talked about his experiences with Karren and the importance of protecting agricultural property rights. Richard Foster spoke on behalf of the HOA, acknowledging their mistakes and supporting stronger regulations. Even Doug Peterson spoke, describing his own involvement and expressing support for clearer rules. The commission listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. At the end of the evening, they announced they would be drafting new regulations to address the issues we'd raised. It felt like a real victory, not just for me, but for anyone who might face similar situations in the future. Spring came early that year. By March, my garden was already showing signs of life, and the baby ducks from the previous year were fully grown. I'd started selling eggs at the local farmers market on weekends, and business was good. People liked knowing where their food came from and meeting the person who raised it. One Saturday morning at the market, a young couple approached my stand. They looked to be in their late 20s, enthusiastic and a little nervous. "Are you Keith Irving?" the woman asked. "That's me. We heard about your situation with the HOA. We're looking at buying property in Polk County, and we want to raise chickens and maybe some goats. Do you have any advice?" I spent the next 20 minutes talking with them about zoning, property selection, animal care, and dealing with neighbors. I gave them my phone number and told them to call if they had questions. "People like you are making this possible for people like us," the man said. "We work in tech like you did, and we want something different. But we were scared of running into the kind of problems you had. Just do your research, know your rights, and don't back down when you're in the right," I said. "Most people are reasonable. The Karren Whitmores of the world are outliers." They bought eggs and left looking energized and hopeful. It reminded me of how I'd felt when I first started this journey. That afternoon, back at home, I was sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea when I saw a car pull up. To my surprise, it was Karren's husband, Donald Whitmore. I hadn't spoken to him since everything happened. He got out of the car slowly, like he wasn't sure this was a good idea. I stood up and walked down to meet him. "Mr. Irving," he said quietly, "I hope I'm not intruding. What can I do for you, Mr. Whitmore?" I wanted to apologize for everything Karren did and for not stopping her sooner. I knew she was getting obsessed with this, but I didn't realize how far she'd go. He looked tired, older than I remembered. We're moving next month, fresh start somewhere else, but I couldn't leave without saying I'm sorry. I looked at him for a long moment. He seemed genuinely remorseful, broken even. I appreciate you coming here to say that. I know it couldn't have been easy. It's the least I could do. What she did was wrong, and you had every right to press charges. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in that family supported her actions. How is she doing? She's in therapy, anger management, dealing with control issues. It's been hard, but I think it's helping. She knows she destroyed a lot of things, including her own reputation. He paused. I don't expect you to forgive her or us. I just wanted you to know that we're trying to do better. I hope therapy helps her, I said, and I hope your fresh start goes well. He nodded, shook my hand, and left. I watched his car disappear down the road, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Anger at what Karren had done, sympathy for Donald who'd been caught in the middle, and a kind of sadness that it had all come to this. But mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful that I'd stood my ground, grateful for the community that had formed around this place, grateful for the peaceful life I was building. The following months were blissfully uneventful. My little farm thrived. The farmers' market became a regular part of my weekend routine. The Rodriguez boys continued their visits, now bringing friends who also wanted to learn about farm animals. Tom and Susan started talking about next year's Harvest Festival being even bigger. In July, the County Planning Commission passed their new regulations. They included clear language about HOA jurisdiction, specific protections for agricultural properties, and penalties for organizations that overstepped their authority. They also created a new position, an agricultural liaison, whose job was to help mediate disputes between agricultural and residential properties. Richard Foster called me when the regulations passed. Thought you'd want to know. This is partially because of what you went through. You made a difference, Keith. We all did, I said. You, Tom, Susan, Jerry, everyone who spoke up. Still, you were the catalyst. You should be proud. I was proud, but more than that, I was relieved. No one else would have to go through what I'd gone through. The system had been fixed, or at least improved. August brought a heat wave, and I spent my days making sure the animals had plenty of water and shade. The goats, in particular, were drama queens about the heat, bleeding pitifully despite having a perfectly good shelter with fans. You're ridiculous, I told Peanut, who was lying in the shade looking martyred. She bleated at me in response. Miguel and Roberto came by one scorching afternoon with a wagon full of ice pops. Mom said the animals might like these, Miguel explained. The animals, huh? I said, eyeing the wagon full of frozen treats. Well, maybe we can have one too, Roberto admitted. We ended up freezing some fruit and vegetables in ice blocks for the goats and ducks, who attacked them with enthusiasm. The boys thought it was hilarious watching the ducks try to figure out how to eat frozen watermelon. Maria came to pick them up at sunset and stayed for a glass of lemonade. They talk about this place constantly. You've created something really special here, Keith. It's just a small farm. It's more than that. It's a place where kids can learn and adults can reconnect with where their food comes from. After everything that happened with the HOA, you could have become bitter. Instead, you opened your doors and built community. That's special. Her words stayed with me. She was right that I could have become bitter. Karren's harassment, the lawsuit, the vandalism, all of it could have soured me on the whole area. But instead, it had brought out the best in most people. The reasonable folks had spoken up, the community had come together, and real change had happened. September brought cooler weather and preparations for the second annual Harvest Festival. We'd learned a lot from the first year, and this time we were ready. We had better parking planned, more vendors signed up, and even a local bluegrass band to provide entertainment. The week before the festival, I got an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Thompson himself pulled up to my house one afternoon. I'd never met him, though I'd certainly interacted with his department enough. Mr. Irving, he said, shaking my hand, I wanted to stop by personally and thank you for the way you handled the situation last year. I'm not sure what you mean. I just defended my property. You did it the right way. You documented everything. You cooperated with law enforcement, and you let the system work. A lot of people in your situation would have escalated things differently, maybe gotten themselves in trouble. You kept your cool, and it made our job easier. I had good advice from Deputy Martinez and Detective Brennan. They both speak highly of you. I also wanted you to know that your case has become a training example for us. We use it to teach officers about agricultural zoning disputes and HOA jurisdiction issues. You've had a bigger impact than you probably realize. We talked for a while about the new county regulations and how they'd affect law enforcement's approach to similar situations. He was genuinely interested in my perspective and asked thoughtful questions. After he left, I realized that the whole ordeal had become something bigger than just my personal story. It had changed policies, educated people, and apparently was now being used to train law enforcement. From the depths of frustration last year, something genuinely positive had emerged. The Harvest Festival exceeded all expectations. Over 400 people attended. The Rodriguezes ran a face painting booth, with the boys helping. Tom and Susan sold out of honey by noon and had to go back to their house for more. Jerry's pony rides had a waiting list, and my egg stand did such good business that I actually ran out. Next year we need to plan for double this crowd, Tom said as we cleaned up that evening. Next year we might need to get a permit for an actual fair, Susan added. Whatever it takes, I said. This has become something really important for the community. That night, exhausted and happy, I sat on my porch listening to the evening sounds of the farm. The chickens had settled in for the night, the ducks were quiet by the pond, and the goats were munching hay in their shelter. This was what peace sounded like. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chen. Saw the pictures from your festival on Facebook. Looks amazing. Glad everything worked out, Keith. You deserved this. I smiled and texted back my thanks. He was right. After everything I'd been through, I did deserve this peace, this community, this life I'd built. October rolled into November, and I started thinking about the holidays. I'd been invited to Thanksgiving at Tom and Susan's, along with Jerry and Patricia. It had become a tradition among us agricultural property owners to stick together, not because we needed to against any threat, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Before Thanksgiving, though, I had one more surprise. The local newspaper, the Polk County Itemizer Observer, wanted to do a feature story on the Harvest Festival and the community that had formed around it. Reporter Jennifer Walsh came out to interview me. "What made you decide to start this farm?" she asked, camera ready to record. I thought about how to answer that. I wanted something real. I'd spent 15 years writing code, which is valuable work, but it's abstract. I wanted to put my hands in the dirt, care for living things, and be part of a tangible cycle of growth and harvest. I wanted to be connected to my food and my community in a way that city life didn't offer. And the conflict with the HOA, how did that affect your vision? Initially, it was terrifying. I thought I might lose everything I'd worked for, but in the end, it brought the community together in ways I never expected. It showed me that most people are reasonable and good, even when a few individuals lose their way. The article came out the week before Thanksgiving and was picked up by several other regional newspapers. My phone exploded with messages from friends I hadn't talked to in years, people congratulating me or asking advice about starting their own small farms. One message stood out. It was from my former boss at the tech company in Portland. "Keith, I've been following your journey on social media. What you've built is incredible. Any chance you'd be willing to come speak to our company about work-life balance and alternative career paths? I think a lot of our engineers could use some inspiration." I agreed and scheduled a talk for December. It would be strange going back to that world, but I was curious to see how it would feel. Thanksgiving was warm and full of laughter. Tom and Susan's house was packed with people, not just the 4 agricultural families, but also the Rodriguezes, Richard Foster, and his wife, Doug Peterson and his family, and several others from the community. It felt less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a family reunion. During dinner, Richard Foster stood up with his wine glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to Keith Irving, who showed us all what it means to stand up for what's right, to the agricultural families who enrich our community, and to second chances and new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt genuinely moved. A year ago, I'd been fighting for my right to exist peacefully on my own property. Now I was surrounded by friends and well-wishers, part of a community that valued what I did. The talk at my former tech company in December was surreal. I stood in the same conference room where I'd sat through countless meetings, looking out at faces I used to see every day. They looked tired, stressed, exactly how I'd felt before I left. I talked about burnout, about finding meaning in work, about the value of connecting to something tangible. I showed pictures of the farm, the animals, the festivals. I was honest about the challenges, including the whole HOA debacle, but I emphasized how working through those challenges had been more rewarding than any coding project I'd ever completed. The Q&A session went an hour over schedule. People wanted to know about the practical aspects, the financial realities, the emotional adjustment. Several people asked for my contact information to discuss their own dreams of leaving tech. My former boss walked me to my car afterward. "You've got a glow about you that you never had when you worked here. I'm jealous, honestly." "You could do it too," I said. "You don't have to stay on the hamster wheel." He laughed. "Maybe someday. For now, I'm glad to see that it's working out for someone." Driving home that evening, I reflected on how far I'd come. 2 years ago, I'd been exhausted and unfulfilled, questioning everything. Now I had purpose, community, and peace. The path hadn't been easy, especially with Karren's interference, but it had been worth it. Christmas was quiet and perfect. I spent the morning doing farm chores, then went to the Rodriguez family's celebration in the afternoon. The boys had made me a photo album documenting their year of visits to the farm, complete with their own handwritten captions and observations. "This is one of the best gifts I've ever received," I told them honestly. Miguel beamed. "We wanted to show you how much we learned." As I paged through the album that evening, back at home with the wood stove crackling, I thought about everything that had happened. The harassment, the vandalism, the lawsuit. It had all seemed so overwhelming at the time, but in the end, it had catalyzed positive change. The county had better regulations. The HOA had better leadership. The community was stronger. And I discovered that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, can lead to outcomes better than you imagined. The new year brought new opportunities. A local school district contacted me about starting a farm education program, bringing elementary school classes out to visit and learn about agriculture and animal care. I agreed immediately, working with Tom, Susan, and Jerry to develop a curriculum. The first class visited in February, 25 third graders and their teacher. They were adorable, asking questions at rapid-fire pace and treating every chicken like it was the most fascinating creature on earth. "Why do chickens eat rocks?" one girl asked. "They're actually called grit, and chickens need them to help grind up food in their gizzards because they don't have teeth," I explained. "That's so cool." She ran off to tell her friends. The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, approached me as the kids were petting goats. "This is incredible. Most of these kids have never been on a farm. They think food just comes from the grocery store. You're giving them a real education." We scheduled visits for 3 more classes that spring, and Mrs. Patterson said she was going to recommend the program to other schools in the district. By March, life had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and joyful. I woke up at dawn, did farm chores, worked a few hours remotely on consulting projects to maintain my income, then spent afternoons on farm improvements or community activities. Evenings were for reading, woodworking, or socializing with neighbors. The 3rd annual Harvest Festival was already in the planning stages, with ambitious ideas for expanding it into a 2-day event. The county agricultural liaison had even offered to sponsor part of it as an example of successful rural-suburban integration. One warm afternoon in early April, I was sitting on my porch watching the goats play when I saw a car I didn't recognize pull up. A woman in her 50s got out, looking around with obvious appreciation. "Mr. Irving?" she called. "That's me. Can I help you?" "My name is Patricia Simmons. I'm with Oregon Agricultural Heritage. We're a nonprofit that works to preserve agricultural land and traditions in areas facing development pressure. I've been reading about your situation and the community you've built here, and I wanted to talk to you about a grant opportunity." She explained that her organization was looking to fund agricultural education and community programs that bridge the gap between rural and suburban areas. They were particularly interested in our Harvest Festival and the school program we'd started. We'd like to offer you a grant of $25,000 to expand your educational programs and support the festival. We'd also like to feature your story in our annual report and publications as an example of successful community integration." I was stunned. "That's incredibly generous. What would you need from us?" "Just documentation of how you use the funds and permission to share your story. We think what you're doing here is a model for other communities facing similar challenges. Agricultural land is being lost every day to development. Finding ways to make it valued and protected within growing communities is critical." I accepted the grant, and we spent the next hour talking about possibilities. With that kind of funding, we could build a proper educational shelter, create printed materials for school visits, and really expand the Harvest Festival into something significant. After she left, I called Tom, Susan, and Jerry to share the news. We had an impromptu celebration that evening, toasting to new opportunities and the continued growth of our little agricultural community. "From chicken vandalism to nonprofit grants," Susan said, laughing. "That's quite a journey." "It really is," I agreed. Looking back on everything that had happened, from Karren's first visit to my door to this moment, I realized that the challenges had been necessary. They'd forced me to defend what I believed in, to articulate why agricultural life mattered, and to build alliances with people who shared those values. Without the conflict, we might never have created something so meaningful. Karren Whitmore had intended to drive me out, to prove that her vision of the community was the only acceptable one. Instead, she'd catalyzed the creation of something much better, a community that valued diversity in land use, that understood the importance of agriculture, and that had systems in place to prevent future abuses of power. I'd heard through the grapevine that Karren and Donald had moved to a subdivision in Beaverton, a place with strict HOA rules and absolutely no tolerance for livestock. I hoped she'd found peace there, that the therapy was helping, and that she'd learned from her mistakes. But mostly, I just hoped she'd left her need to control others behind. As for me, I was exactly where I wanted to be. My rooster crowed every morning at dawn, my goats bleated for their breakfast, my ducks paddled contentedly in their pond, and my chickens produced the best eggs in the county. The neighbors appreciated it rather than complained about it. Kids learned from it. The community thrived because of it. The agricultural liaison from the county stopped by one afternoon in late May to see how things were going. Her name was Diane Whitfield, and she'd taken the position specifically because of the regulations that had been passed after my situation. "I've handled 3 disputes since taking this job," she told me. "All of them were resolved peacefully because of the new regulations and the precedent your case set. HOAs now understand they can't overstep their bounds, and agricultural property owners know their rights are protected. You really did change things, Keith." "It wasn't just me," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "It was everyone who stood up and spoke out." "True, but you were the catalyst. Don't minimize that." She was right, of course. I had been the catalyst, even though I hadn't chosen to be. Sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects you never anticipated. Sometimes defending your own peace creates peace for others, too. The sun was setting over the hills, casting everything in golden light. My animals were settling in for the evening, content and healthy. In the distance, I could hear the sound of kids playing in the HOA neighborhood, the peaceful sounds of families living their lives. This was what it was all about, not conflict or regulations or legal battles, but simply the right to live your life in peace, to pursue your own vision of happiness, and to contribute something meaningful to your community. I'd found that here, on these 5 acres in Polk County, Oregon, surrounded by chickens, goats, and ducks, I'd found it through standing up to someone who tried to take it away. And I'd found it by building bridges instead of walls, by educating instead of isolating, and by staying true to what I knew was right. The sheriff had laughed at Karren's agricultural zone complaint, and rightfully so. Because at the end of the day, the law was clear, my rights were protected, and no amount of HOA overreach could change that. But more importantly, the community had chosen to embrace agricultural diversity rather than fight against it. They'd chosen understanding over fear, education over ignorance, and community over control. That was the real victory, not winning the legal battles, but changing hearts and minds, creating something that would last long after the conflicts were forgotten. I went inside as the last light faded from the sky, tired from a good day's work and grateful for the life I'd built. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight I was simply content. The farm was thriving, the community was strong, and I was finally completely at peace.